To begin with, when we talk about community policing is not a thing, it's not a program. Community policing is a philosophy. And the philosophy, when we talk about community policing, is something that underlies everything that we do. And in Oro Valley, it's actually taken to the level where community policing is an underlying value to all the things that we do. I've been lecturing on community policing at the University of Arizona for the past 20 years. I was tasked with doing a lot with community policing when I was with the Tucson Police Department, and spent a lot of time looking at the things and what we can do. And if you actually put it in as a value or as an underlying principle, something that's so important, the importance of community policing, it permeates everything as far as hiring, how we train our people, how we promote, and all. And you'll see when we get into the principles of community policing why that's so critical. For how we retain our people, maintain the values and the integrity of what we do. But I wanted to keep in mind that community policing is a value, it's not really a thing. So the history of community policing, I think it's important that we understand how did we get where we are. Community policing, you know, I think any of you heard me speak, you know that I'm a real fan of Sir Robert Peel. He's the father of modern day law enforcement, and he came up with his principles and talked about things. And one of the principles Robert Peel had was that the police are the people and the people are the police. And that's key. That's real key when we talk about community policing. And what happened was back in the 1820s is when Robert Peel had that philosophy, we started seeing policing and the police officers were part of the community. The community had a responsibility, the police had a responsibility, and they worked together as a team, because the people are the police and the police are the people. And then what happened was, over the years, the police and the people started separating. And as a result of the separation of the police and the people, we found ourselves actually in the 70s in a position where we had to take a giant step backward to Sir Robert Peel's days, because the police weren't the people and the people weren't the police. A defining moment happened in 1968 in Chicago at the Democratic National Convention, when there was a huge problems between the police and the people. And they started realizing, at least the police profession started realizing, you know, people don't really like us. And so we needed to figure out a way to get back in being part of the people. And so there were a lot of programs that started, and we started programs with the Tucson Police Department called problem-oriented policing. It made the iteration of community-based problem-oriented policing. Then, because cops like acronyms, it just became CVPOP and all. And so, but we had to figure out, how did we get to where we were? Why is it that we now need to figure out a way that we're going to have to get back with the community? And so if you trace back about what happened was, you know, there were things that we tried to do to become more efficient as police agencies. You know, back at the turn of the century, you know, we had walking beats, they had call boxes and lights and all, and then the automobile came along, and they figured out, well, we can get fewer police officers, we can put them in cars, but when we put them in cars, we separated them from the people. And then we figured out we could put radios in the cars, and then when you put radios in the cars and people could call in and all, then the police officers were in the cars that are dispatched with radios, and they're even more separated from the people. For those of you that are old enough to remember, there was a TV show called Adam 12. If you ever remember the show, Adam 12. Councilmember Burns, I'm sure you don't, but, you know, but anyway. Google. Yeah, Google it, that's right. Anyway, if you remember, Adam 12 was the designator of the radio. The radio was the star of the show. And what these guys did is they drove around in a car waiting for the box to squawk and tell them to go do something. What we had come is from having a connection with the community and working with the community to becoming completely reactive to waiting for the radio to call us to go do something. And the show was these two guys driving around, Malloy and Reed, driving around talking to each other until somebody told them to go somewhere. There was no interaction with the public unless there was a problem. So we became completely reactive. And then the other thing that came along was 911. 911 was you call, we haul. And it was completely reactive. And so what we had is we had the situation where we had gone completely to being reactive. Now, where most people learn about what police do You know, I'm sure I could open it up like I do in my classes, but that's not appropriate for this setting. But where do most people learn about what police officers do? Well, they learn from television and movies. And where do most police officers learn about it? A lot of people say in my classes at the university, oh, they learn about it at the police academy. But the reality is cops learn about police work from TV and movies too. And so what happened is the mindset for police was that we be reactive. We wait until something happens. When I joined the Tucson Police Department in 1978, we didn't have handheld radios. We couldn't get out of the car and still be in contact. And we would talk about getting out of the car and walking around and interacting with the public. And what people would say was, well, I might miss the big one. You know, what happens if I have a big call and I can't hear my radio? And so we separated ourselves so much from the community that the community didn't have that interaction or that relationship. So when we decided to get involved with community policing, when it became a big deal in the 1970s and 80s, one of the things we wanted to do is we wanted to work from going from being reactive to being proactive. We need to figure out what's going on in the community. We need to know what our community wants from us, what our expectations are. And actually the way to do that, it's not a real word, and I know that, but coactive is something that I really tout because that really is Robert Peel's principle. The police are the people, and the people are the police. We have to coactively police, and that's community policing. You all have a responsibility, the police have a responsibility, so we all work together, and we coactively provide policing in the community. So that being said, one of the things we want to talk about is what's the definition of community policing. There is no definition of community policing. That drives my students crazy because there really isn't it. There was a definition that the Supreme Court came up with when they were trying to come up with obscenity laws, and that's the best definition I came up with. And when they tried to figure out what was obscene, Justice Potter Stewart made the comment, you know, I don't know what it is, but I'll know it when I see it. Okay, that's community policing. We know it when we see it. Because actually, the community, by definition, defines community policing. We police differently in Oro Valley than they police in Memphis, Tennessee. We police differently than Phoenix, Arizona. We police differently in one part of town than we do other parts of town. And I will get into our principles of community policing and why that's important to note. But community policing is defined by the community and community standards. Robert Kennedy had a great quote and said, what is equally true that every community gets the kind of law enforcement it insists on. And in Oro Valley, we get the kind of law enforcement that we insist on. It's in the general plan that we're going to do community policing in Oro Valley. And what's in the general plan that talks about the expectations of our community? It talks about low crime rate. It talks about maintenance of community safety, response to emergencies. The general plan has a shall in there, so that we shall expand community policing programs. That's been a challenge over the past several years, but we've done that, again, because of community policing. The community's been involved, and we've been able to do that. Crime prevention, and I'll get back to that in a minute, high visibility enforcement, and traffic safety. These are all things that our community has a high expectation about. But when we talk about a model of policing that's important, and we talk about our approach to community policing, we take a prevention model. My philosophy and my belief, and I think that everybody in this room will agree, that people in Oro Valley would much rather not be the victim of a crime instead of have us getting there quickly after the fact. People don't want to be the victims of a crime. When I was with the Tucson Police Department, I'd go out to groups and I would say, so what's an acceptable level of crime? And people would actually stop and think about it. I came to Oro Valley and asked that question. It's like, well, that's a ridiculous question. It's 0. Now, crime's been around since societies have been around, and we've studied it, we've looked at it. We know we're not going to eliminate crime, but we certainly want to be as close to 0 as we can. Chief Carr's in the audience. You know, he'd like to never see a fire again. We have sprinklers, we have fire retardant tiles, we have fire retardant carpet, walls, and all. But he also staffs a very, very good fire department to make sure that if something does happen, they're able to respond. So we'll do all the prevention things, recognizing there are going to be times when we're going to have to respond. But the key to this is prevention. We have to be able to prevent things. The difficulty is when you prevent things, how do you measure what's not occurring? I've had people ask me, so why do we need a police department in Oro Valley? We don't have much crime. I don't know how to answer that question, you know. We don't have many fires, Chief. Why do we need to have fire sprinklers? I think we need to talk about, you know, some of those parallels or those comparisons. We don't have potholes in our street. Why do we spend money on maintaining our roadways? Because if we don't maintain them, then we will have an issue. We look at the trends, we look at the things, what it is that we can prevent. We've got some serious problems facing us in the future with our youth. You know, trends that we've seen issues. Had a meeting today in Phoenix, and we're talking about some of the prevention things with drugs and all, and some of these campaigns, you know, the ad council did, you know, this is your brain on drugs. Do you remember that commercial? Well, they quit spending money on that, because you know what? It was successful. And because it was successful, we don't need to do it anymore. So now what's happening? The age that the kids are starting using drugs, the average in Arizona is 13 years old. That means we got kids that are 7 and 8 years old out there using drugs. We have got to address that. That's going to be a problem for all of us in this room. It's certainly going to be a problem for law enforcement. In the last 30 days in Arizona, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders have used marijuana more than they use tobacco. That's a trend that we don't want to see. You know, we have members of our governing board for AMFI in the audience. That's a huge issue to them. That's a huge issue to us. So those are those things that we have to look at, and we have to be able to work with the community. And we talk about community policing. That's working with our schools. That's working with our education people, with our prevention people, and working collaboratively with our partners and being able to do things. So when we talk about community policing, I talked about the general plan. Also, it's in the Town of Oro Valley strategic plan. It's in our department strategic plan. And then it also is basically mandated by the people that we partner and collaborate with, the demands that they want community policing and they want this type of policing in our community. So let's talk about community policing, since that's why we're here. And I want to get through this because I heard a couple people ask how long this would be, and the Vice Mayor said, not more than an hour, and I took the hint. So I want to make sure that I get through all of this, but anyway, the real meat and potatoes of community policing. These are the 5 principles of community policing, and I'll tell you how I arrived at these 5 principles and how I've applied them. Back in I told you that there was this wave about trying to do community policing. There was a lot of money that was put forth in grants to police agencies predominantly in the early 80s. And I thought, well, I need to look at these and figure out what's going to work for us. And every study that was done, where all these, literally, there are millions of dollars put forth to agencies for community policing initiatives and pilot projects, they all failed. And I thought, well, that's odd. You know, this is supposed to be such a great thing, and I've looked at community policing, and everyone I've looked at failed. And so I thought, well, okay, well, let's read it from the perspective about why it failed. And I went through and I found there were 5 common areas that one or more of these areas were missing in those that failed. And so I kind of synthesized it down and figured out these are the 5 areas, these are the 5 principles that you have to have in community policing, in your philosophy, in your value, if you're going to make sure community policing works. And the first one's service. We are a service organization. Every person that comes to work at the Oro Valley Police Department has to endure my service speech. Unfortunately for our deputy chief and our town manager who sit through it too, they have to hear my philosophy on service. And I'll tell you my philosophy on service. When I was a lieutenant, we had this big thing. You know, we've got to remember the public sector and private sector, you know, there's about 10 years apart. The public sector is kind of behind on getting things done. But we had a class on legendary service. Ken Blanchard had done this thing. The guy who wrote the 1 Minute Manager and talked about legendary service and how we need to do service, use Nordstrom's as the example. And so they decided, well, let's apply it to a police department. And so we went to this class, and they're talking about customer service. And it never set well with me, and I kept thinking, I couldn't figure out why it didn't set well with me about customer service didn't feel right. And what I finally came up with is the folks that we work for, and that's the old cliche, you know, I pay your salary. I tell everybody that works for me, if somebody ever says that to you, tell them thank you, because they do. The cliches are usually true, okay? So they do pay. You folks pay my salary. And so we're there to provide service, but you're not customers. You're the stockholders. You're the people, you're our bosses. So we have to make sure that we don't treat our bosses like they're merely customers. Now, I will jokingly say, but I'm half-heartedly serious with our folks, is, the closest thing we have to a customer are people we put in jail. They get all of our attention, they get good service, they get treated with respect and all. But to somebody that calls 911 or somebody that comes in and needs something, or the officers are stopping on the street, our citizens, they're our bosses. And we need to treat them with a higher level of respect and a higher level of service than we do. So service is key for us to be able to make sure that we do that. If we lose sight of the fact that we're a service organization, we're here to serve, then we're failing our community. And that's critical. And unfortunately, there are agencies in this country who have lost sight of the fact that service is why we exist. And I want to make sure they never forget that in our organization. The second is accountability. And that I want to take that back to Sir Robert Peel. The police are the people and the people are the police. So I hold everybody, including myself, but everybody that works for the Oro Valley Police Department are held accountable to provide that service. But I also hold the community accountable. The community has to be accountable because the second piece, the people are the police. We're just the paid professionals, but we're all in this together. The reason that I wanted to come to Oro Valley to be the police chief was because I really believed this stuff. And I came here because I knew in Oro Valley we could actually make this work because the people are committed to making it work. If you see something suspicious, you'll call us. And the expectation is we'll show up. So you call, we'll show up, and that takes care of it. If you see something that doesn't look right, you let us know, we'll investigate it. That's the idea. That's that relationship. So we hold the community accountable. If you see something, you let us know. We have some Sun City residents in here. You know how we feel about open garage doors. That's important that you close your garage door. We're going to hold you accountable to do the things that you need to do. We're going to make sure you lock your cars, that you don't put packages on your front seat. We want to hold the community accountable because that takes care of those invitations for thieves to be here. We put people in jail, we get them off the street, we eliminate crime. But if we can keep people from coming here to do crime in the first place because we have a reputation, and I know we have a reputation for being tough on traffic. I'm sure you've all heard that. But that keeps people out of here, and that's a good thing. So if we want to make sure that we have people that don't come here to do bad things, they go somewhere else to do their crime, that's okay. But we target harden our area. If they come here and commit crime, our commitment is we're going to go after them, we're going to prosecute them, we're going to bring all of our resources to bear upon them. But the community has to be accountable, we have to be accountable. We hold our officers accountable. We tell our officers, if you're out working at night and somebody breaks into a business, we want you to find it before the business owner finds it. And that happens. So we have that accountability and that aspect where we want them to do that. The third area is problem solving. And problem solving is one of the key areas. I did a presentation to a group and we were talking about the importance of talking to people and understanding what their problems are and being able to listen. It takes time to be able to get out of your car and go walk around and talk to your businesses, to stop and talk to somebody who's gardening in their front yard or mowing the grass or pulling weeds, to get to know the folks in the neighborhood, to focus on that, to be able to hear what their issues are. We don't want to go back to that being reactive. We want to be out there, let's hear what your issues are. We have a program called Adopt a Business. We had one of our jewelry stores that had their Adopt a Business officer. There was somebody hanging out in the parking lot, didn't feel right about it, called the Adopt a Business officer on his cell phone and said, this just doesn't feel right. They got our community action team involved. They pulled the guy over. He had a gun and a mask in the car. Was he going to commit an armed robbery? Don't know. Did we prevent an armed robbery? Don't know. Can't measure what didn't occur. But they took the time to figure out that there's something wrong. We increased their awareness what to look for. That was good. When we talk about problem solving, we look in the area where we exist. We aren't in a vacuum. We're not on an island. Crooks don't know geographic boundaries. They don't care. The majority of the criminals that we arrest don't live in Oro Valley. It's another thing people say, well, we don't have many criminals in Oro Valley, so That's, you know, we don't, but we're a target-rich environment. And so people come here to do bad things. I had a conversation with the Surprise police chief today, and same thing. People come into here to do bad things because they know there's places that they can do that. But we have a reputation, so they'll go somewhere else. And that's what we want. We want them to know that we will do everything we can to prevent crime. So we deal with those issues. If we see crime or see trends coming our way, we have a very close working relationship with the Sheriff's Department, with Marana Police Department, with Tucson. You know, Tucson has one of the highest crime rates in the state of Arizona. We have one of the lowest. They're 3.5 miles away from us. So we have to make sure that we're paying attention to what they're doing. So we want to work real hard with that and to be able to look at that. What's coming our way? What can we put in place? I'd like to talk about some of the successes that we had. We use a thing called crime prevention through environmental design when we look at things. We built, when the Walmart was being built, before the Walmart was built, there were concerns about, well, my gosh, you know, Walmart, there could be a lot of crime there. Look at the one at First and Wetmore. I worked in the city for 21 years. I know about some of these things. And we put things in place in anticipation, so we know that we'll put things in place so we won't have a problem. Instead of saying, let's wait until it's built and then say, woe is me, we got a problem, we put things in place. When the hospital was being built, we went to Northwest Hospital. What are your issues? What are your concerns? We looked at the crime rate. We talked to the Sheriff's Department. And we worked with the hospital to make sure that we didn't replicate those problems here. We addressed them prospectively, so we had them taken care of. So that way, we are preventing issues. We're problem solving in advance. We're not trying to catch up and do it after the fact. All of this has been very effective, so we've known. The movie theater, we have a sergeant on our department that reviewed the plans for the movie theater. They redesigned the movie theater because of her recommendations to make it safer. So we don't see the crime, the high auto theft rates. We don't see the same kinds of issues that we see at other like locations because we plan to address those up front and not have that happen. So problem solving is huge. But again, that's our accountability for making sure that we're doing the right things. The fourth is neighborhood focus. We have to be focused on our neighborhood. We have to know what's going on. How can we solve problems? How can we be accountable? How can we provide service if we're not focused on a particular area? So one of the things that we try to do is have our officers focus on a particular area, on the businesses, get to know the businesses, get to know the neighborhoods. What are the ingress, egress? So they have all of that information. You know, what are some of the trends that we're seeing? Do we have an elder population that we have to concern ourselves with exploitation or abuse? Those are the types of things that we want to make sure that we're focused on and we have that neighborhood focus so they can remain accountable, so they can problem solve, and they can provide that service. That's key that we're able to do that. In Oro Valley, as we've grown, it's become a little more unwieldy. As staffs up, we're going to try to, we have a plan to come down. We have 4 beats in the town. We want to bring it down to 7 so we can do a better job in the neighborhood focus and be able to work with that. But by having some of these programs like Adopt a Business that we have with our patrol folks, or Adopt a School that we have with our motor officers, that work in relation with our SROs, we're able to kind of still maintain that neighborhood focus and keep those down so we're able to look at it. And the last one, and probably the one where you have most failures in community policing, is decentralization. A police agency is paramilitary in nature, which means that you know, we don't have a lot of decision making that goes on. You know, it's usually at the top because it's just the nature of the organization. In a police organization, in order for us to be effective, the people that are at the point of contact of service need to be the ones that are able to make decisions and provide that service. So our philosophy is we're going to push decision-making down. We're going to let the folks that are out there doing the job on the street, we want to give them the tools, we want to give them the training, we want to hire the right people, give them the right supervision, and make sure that when they're out there, they're making the very best decisions they can. Now, any of you that have been in management, which a lot of you I see in the audience, and I know you have, whenever you push decision-making down, mistakes increase. And what would happen in these areas that didn't decentralize or did and then pulled back was some beat officer would go out, make a mistake, upset a citizen would call the mayor, The mayor would call the police chief, say, I don't want to hear from the citizens anymore. The police chief would call the watch captain and say, don't let that guy make a decision again. Everything has to be run by downtown. Decentralization, and then the service is not there. You cannot have community policing if you don't let your officers engage in the decision-making, problem-solving, being accountable, and providing that service. So if you're going to put them out there in the street, we're going to tell them you address those issues, you're going to be held accountable, and we're going to support you on this. And that's the other key is, and trust me, I've had those conversations with our mayor. You know, so I've had a call. And sometimes, yeah, we had an officer that made a mistake. If it's a mistake of the heart, you know, that's one thing. If it's something that, you know, they're trying to do the right thing, and it's just one way, we're not going to do it in the future, he understands that. I understand that. And we're going to support our folks to do that. But again, that's key to how we hire and train and retain our folks. So we want to make sure that they're able to do that. Bill Bratton, when he was in New York, he implemented some community policing things to deal with some of the quality of life issues and all, was highly successful. But one of the things he also did was a thing called CompStat, and where the commanders would sit around, they try to figure out, okay, what's going on, and I'm going to hold these people accountable and all. In Oro Valley, and this is a new trend that I'm seeing from across the nation and with the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the more progressive police departments, you don't have to do CompStat because your cops on the street are the ones that are telling you what's the issues. And they're already addressing it because they have the tools to do it. And that's what we want. We want our officers addressing those issues now, not waiting until there's a command staff meeting at the end of the week to do that. We want them to deal with it and deal with it now. So we give them that support, we give them the tools, because they understand these principles that you can make the decision. You're going to be held accountable. We want you to problem solve, and we want you to provide that service to the people. So they're out there doing that, and it works. So what we have is some examples, you know, because one of the things, and Councilmember Burns and I have talked about this, that we do have some programs as a result of being a community policing organization, but they don't come without cost. You know, we have a Citizen Police Academy that we do twice a year, and a Teen Academy we do once a year. Now, our line item on that budget is $3,500, but we have to staff that with people. And so there's a dollar amount associated with having people do that, depending on the time of day or who the expert is and all, because we have to do these out. They could be overtime and all, but we have the support of the mayor and council and the town manager to do these things, but we have to take staff to do that in addition. Our school resource officer program, that's a $700,000 program that we do, that it's a commitment to our kids. And, you know, I was talking to our detective sergeant today. We had, in the past 3 years, and we don't make a big deal about some of these things because we want to take care of it, and a lot of these things, if we do the right thing, we can. But in the last 3 years, we've seen a 600% increase in child exploitation cases with our detectives. 600%. It's starting to come down. And what it is we got our SROs involved. We've been doing an education campaign, and we've done the things necessary. We think that we've worked with the schools, and a lot of the issues now are starting to come down, and we've put several people in jail. But we've addressed these things in a holistic approach, and we've worked together to do that. So the SRO program is one of those programs that's indicative or an example of our community policing philosophy. But the way we approach things makes a huge difference. A few years ago, we had a huge problem with heroin use that was highly advertised, and there's a lot of focus on it. We weren't the only school, but we were the ones that, or the only schools, but we were the ones that were focused on it. We partnered with the Amphitheater School District. They didn't bury their head in the sand. We worked on it. We had 7 kids that died as a result of heroin use and prescription abuse. And we now have nipped that in the bud. It's done. We don't have a problem anymore because we have worked on that, because we're able to, again, apply those principles. We had a problem, we solved the problem, we held ourselves accountable, we collaborated with our partners, and we fixed that. We have we have things that come as a result of that: our Drug Awareness Day, Project Graduation, our Community Resources Unit. You know, it costs us $270,000 just to staff that, but we have 80 volunteers in our CVAP program. We have other volunteers that are working with us that are doing just a phenomenal work out there. We have our CERT program. We have great things that are happening in this community.